Hi, I'm John,
And I'm Stephen.
and welcome back to the overview of Christian doctrines. Now, we're finally getting right into it in understanding who God is.
Mm-hmm.
And we get, like, from our previous episode, we get that God is the ground and basis of all our beings,
That's right.
and that He is the maximally great being. But who, or rather, what exactly is God like? Specifically, that's what we're going to ask today. What makes God God? Like, is he like? What are his characteristics, his attributes? So today we are going to be covering some of his main attributes, right, Stephen?
Yeah, that's right. The first attribute that we want to cover is God is independent, meaning to say that God's existence is not dependent on anything or anyone else. You see, the rest of us, our existence is contingent. That is to say, our existence depends on God. But God's existence does not depend on anything else. God is always existing. God is ever existing. God is self-existing. That's what ase means, the Latin word ase, from which you get aseity. God's existence is from himself. God's existence is by himself.
Yep, and we have some verses that affirms that claim. Uh, John chapter 5 verse 26. For as the Father has life in himself, so he has granted the Son also to have life in himself. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. That's from John chapter 1 verse 3.
The second attribute that we want to talk about is God is eternal. Now, because God is the creator of the universe and time is a property of the universe, so God is not subject to time because God is the creator of time. That means God transcends time, his existence is beyond time. God is the same yesterday, today, forever. He is not bound by time.
Yeah, and Psalms 90 verse 2 says exactly that. From everlasting to everlasting, you are God. To the only God before all time, and
Mhm.
now and forever. That's from Jude verse 25.
So, logically, following from that, since God is eternal and timeless, God is also immutable because He's not temporal, He's not affected by time, He doesn't change. God is always who He says He is. Uh, I am who I am. Now, the rest of us, sometimes we may say, I'm a patient person or I am a kind person, but we are not always patient. We are not always kind. We are not always consistent with these attributes that we claim to have. But God is always consistent with all of his attributes. He always possesses all his attributes maximally. He is always loving. He is always kind. He is always righteous. He is always holy. He is always just. He is always omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent.
Oh, okay. But hang on, Stephen. Does that mean that God doesn't change, in particularly perhaps change his mind?
Mhm.
Because I guess when we read the Bible, sometimes of the stories that we read, that we seem or it appears to look like as if though God has changed his mind when certain situation or events unfold. So what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, when we say God is immutable or God is unchanging, we're talking about God's nature is unchanging. Now, because we are changeable,
Mm.
because we change all the time and we are all different individuals, so God relate to each and every one of us differently, different in different scenarios, but with whomever God deals with, he is always who he says he is. He's always all of his attributes. He's always maximally loving. He's always maximally holy. He's always omnipresent, omnipotent, omniscient, with whoever that he deals with.
Okay, and we have this exact same quote from Exodus chapter 3 verse 14 that says, God said to Moses, I am who I am. And Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. That's from Hebrews 13 verse 8. And from James chapter 1 verse 17, the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow due to change.
The next attribute of God that we want to look at is omnipresence. God is omnipresent, meaning to say God is everywhere present. Now, to be omnipresent means that God is cognizant of and causally active in every point in space.
Wow. So that means that he is everywhere. There's nowhere that God is not present,
God, there's no point in space that is inaccessible to God.
inaccessible. All right. And I think Psalms 139, verse 7 to 10 captures that. Where shall I go from your spirit? Or where shall I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me. Also in Jeremiah chapter 23, verse 24, can a man hide himself in secret places so that I cannot see him? Declares the Lord. Do I not feel the heaven and the earth? Declares the Lord.
The next attribute of God that we want to look at is omniscience. God is all-knowing. He knows everything that can be known, whether it is in the past, in the present, or in the future.
So does that mean that God knows even our innermost thoughts, like all our future decisions and choices that we would make?
God knows everything about us, and God knows everything about everything.
Wow. 1 John chapter 3, verse 20 says, for whenever our hearts condemn us, God is greater than our heart, and he knows everything. Great is our Lord and abundant in power. His understanding is beyond measure. That's from Psalms 147, verse 5.
The next one we want to look at is God is omnipotent. Now, to be omnipotent means to have the ability to do anything. God is all-powerful. God is almighty. Now, of course, there are some things that are logical contradictions. For example, God cannot draw a square circle. God cannot create a merit bachelor. These would be contradictions of terms. So God can bring about any possible state of affair that can actually be logically brought about without logical contradictions.
So as long as it's not a logical contradiction, God can do it.
Yes.
Wow. And Jesus himself also said that in Matthew chapter 19, verse 26. And looking at them, Jesus said to them, with people, this is impossible, but with God, all things are possible. And Job 42, verse 2 says, I know that you can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted.
And we have other attributes of God. God is holy. God is love. God is truth. God is righteous. God is patient. God is just. God are all these attributes all of the time.
Well, hang on, Stephen. Like I noticed that some of these attributes is some of them we ourselves as human beings also have. For example, love, the attributes of patience, like you mentioned, and also perhaps even the knowing of right and wrong, being just. And however, we also do see that some of God's attributes are something that we cannot attain. For example, being eternal,
Yeah.
being all-knowing, omnipresent, right? That's physically impossible for us. So is there a way to, you know, uh, s- speak about these differences or categorize these things?
Yeah, so theologians often talk about these two terms, incommunicable attributes of God and the communicable attributes of God. By incommunicable, what theologians mean by that is that these are attributes that God alone possesses. He possesses these attributes exclusively: independent, eternality, immutability, so on and so forth. And the attributes that God shares with us as his image bearers, as the image of God, we have we possess these attributes as well: holy, love, truth, righteous, patient, and just. Now, to varying degrees, which causes some theologians who categorize them differently. Instead of saying incommunicable and communicable attributes, some theologians will look at all these attributes and say, hold on, actually we do possess all these attributes to varying degrees. So if you take the idea that God is the maximally great being, and so God possesses all great making properties to the maximum, because he is God, we do not possess any of these maximally. We possess all of them to varying degrees, which means, for example, take omniscience, all-knowing. Now, God possesses the property of knowledge to the maximum, and we call that omniscience. But we are not completely ignorant. We know certain things as well. So we share in the attribute of having knowledge, just that not to the maximum amount.
That's wonderful. And I think it's what's interesting is like just looking at these attributes on its own, and they are so remarkably so wonderful, they're so awesome, and that makes God God. like just looking at them individually.
That's right.
But I think the more amazing thing is when we do take time to actually look at these attributes collectively or pair them up together. And then there seems to be a compounding effect. And that makes God even much more remarkable. For example, like when you pair his eternal attribute with his attribute of love, that means that he's eternally loving. Or when he is omnipotent and he is just, he is a very powerful and just God that has every right to bring about judgment. Or when he is just and yet also patience, right? It seems like it's two sides
Of the same coin.
of the same coin, right? And that makes wow, so much more depth towards this infinite God that we worship.
That's right. He is who he is.
Right. And so I guess these are the attributes that makes God God. So stay tuned for next time.